Hurt, political columnist for the Washington Times. Amy Walter, national editor for the Cook Political Report, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles.
Well, the Trump interview was extremely interesting. He's extremely good at this because he dances and he deeks and he faints and then he disappears without backing down. When you asked him, for example, about his critique of the Romney plan, which was self-deportation, which is a lot softer than a forcible deportation, which he's advocating now, and you said, well, didn't you say it was crazy and mean-spirited? He denied ever having said it was mean-spirited. Well, in fact, he did.
Yeah, we've got the quote, actually, from 2012, a Newsmax interview. Republicans didn't have anything going for them with respect to Latinos and with respect to Asians. The Democrats didn't have a policy for dealing with illegal immigrants, but what they did have going for them is they weren't mean-spirited about it. He was asked about Romney. Romney had a crazy policy of self-deportation, which was maniacal. It sounded as bad as it was, and he lost all the Latino vote, he lost the Asian vote, he lost everybody who was inspired to come into this country.
And in one of your questions, you try to give him a pathway out of this by saying, what, has something changed in the last 4 years that would account for your complete about face, where you were to the left of Romney, and now you are way to the right of where Romney was by calling for forced deportation, and he didn't take it. He simply, so you've got to ask yourself, what kind of revelation did he have that made a guy who essentially said, that Romney had lost everybody who was inspired to come into the country, a very pro-immigration statement, and now ending up way to the right on this, and actually introducing, because he's the front runner, he's made this issue, which was way off the table, the central issue, deportation or not. It used to be citizenship or a work permit. Do you get to vote? What kind of barriers you want to have at the border to ensure that there are no more illegal immigration. But now the debate is deportation. We've never had that.
Charlie, what about this in the big picture of this Republican primary?
Well, I think that a big reason why Donald Trump has done so well in terms of reaching voters is that he, if you look at his plan, as Charles was saying, a lot of these things it's no different from what Mitt Romney proposed. When he talks about the deportation task force, you're talking about Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency.
ICE, yeah.
When you're talking about the Trump wall, you're talking about the secure fence of 2006, which, of course, President Obama and Secretary Clinton both, or Senator Clinton at the time, both supported. But when he does this, he does it in a way that is so animated, and he renames all of it, all these things like the Trump wall with a big fat door that's going to be welcoming. He renames it, and voters think that, well, he doesn't sound like a politician. He must really mean it. He must really be willing to do all these things. And so I think that he has sort of generated an enormous amount of trust, certainly among Republican voters or Republican-leaning voters. But I think that that same thing that appeals to those voters could very easily appeal to a lot of Democratic voters as well.
Yeah. Amy, what's interesting is the other candidates, I think. I mean, I think everyone knows where Trump is, and he's laid out the plan. But to hear Ted Cruz today go after, really, Rubio and others, and here is New York Times 2013 about Ted Cruz then, about an amendment he put forward. What Mr. Cruz has tried to articulate in both word and deed is a middle ground. It got no support from Democrats in Washington, but it goes further than many on the far right want to go by offering leniency to undocumented immigrants here already, a path to legal status but not to citizenship, a green card with no right to naturalization. Going further, he says, asked about what to do with the people here illegally, however, he stressed that he had never tried to undo the goal of allowing them to stay. The amendment that I introduced removed the path to citizenship, but it did not change the underlying work permit of the Gang of Eight. That was the compromise, he said during a recent visit to El Paso. Mr. Cruz noted that he had not called for deportation, or as Mitt Romney famously advocated, self-deportation. But to hear him today in New Hampshire, it sounds like he was closer to Trump than he was to Rubio.
And he sounds like that a little bit even on legal immigration, on H-1B visas, saying now that I've looked at it and there's abuse and there are problems with this, we now need to cut back on that as well. So, look, what Ted Cruz is running on is he is the consistent conservative. Everybody else he can point to who've strayed from the straight and narrow on the conservative path, and he's been the one who's been there all along. And yet there are going to be instances, and obviously other candidates are going to take advantage of this, to show that actually he hasn't been as consistent as he'd like to be. And look, the muddier the water gets on this issue of who's been where on immigration reform, the better it is for somebody like Marco Rubio, the better it is for somebody like Jeb Bush, who will be tagged as the support for amnesty candidates by conservatives in this race.
Look, the Cruz position is slippery and technical. What he means is I never called for citizenship. But what he's not saying is what you just showed, is that he actually introduced an amendment that instead of offering citizenship would offer essentially permanent residence and a green card, which is a position I happen to support. But when it comes, but to then declare that I've been consistent, I've been against amnesty, yes, narrowly, yes, if you say that means citizenship, but essentially he has been for legalization of the 11 million. That's a position that I think he's trying to obscure now, and that's an example.
And he still has a vote on that bill to help him with that, right? He'll still say, look, at the end of the day, I voted against the Gang of Eight bill. Marco Rubio voted for it. He's for amnesty. I'm not. We can get into all the technical details, but let's face it.
But introducing an amendment is not a technical detail.
Yeah.
I agree.
It is a big detail, but what about just quickly the issue of immigration for Republicans? There are so many other issues that seem to be low-hanging fruit there, and this is a lot of time on the issue of immigration that is splitting this party up.
Well, it is a potent issue, and it has been a potent issue for a very long time. And I think that the media, a lot of the mainstream media, tries to ignore it and pretend like it's not an important issue. But it touches on so many other issues, like the economy, like health care, like education. You know, it touches on all those things in a way that you know, obviously Donald Trump has done a magnificent job of you know, weaponizing to his advantage, and you know, and I think actually going back to what Amy was saying, that all this obfuscation about politicians trying to cover up their record, trying to say that, I think in a lot of ways that helps Donald Trump too, because he can just say, you know, y'all are all wrong.
Right.
I'm going to build the Trump wall, and that's working for him.
By the way, you've got that Trump down.
I work on it.
Next up, the FBI steps